The wind came in hard and straight off the ridge, a sound like torn canvas. Eli Mercer hunched over the saddle horn and rode into it, cheek raw, beard rimed white. Daisy's breath plumed in quick bursts that shattered into ice dust. The white ahead changed a thin smear of color where no color should be. He pulled the mare to a halt and slid down. Snow took him to the ankle, then to the shin as he pushed toward the stain. A pine at the edge of the hollow held a drift at its roots, and from that drift a hand reached out, brown skin gone bluish at the knuckles. He crouched. A young woman lay curled against the trunk hair, packed with sleet face half under crusted snow. Buckskin leggings, torn wool coat soaked and stiff. Blood had spread under her thigh and gone black in the cold. Eli kept one hand near the Colt on his belt and spoke low. "Can you hear me?" Her lashes fluttered. Dark eyes opened fast and wild. She jerked away from his touch and bit off a cry. The movement wrung another seep of blood into the snow. "You are not safe here," he said. "Neither of us is not in this wind." Her gaze skipped past him into the trees, then down toward her own body, as if measuring what it could still do. Her lips were pale. "Do not touch the book," she said. The words came in a voice rough with cold, cadenced by another language under the English. "I'm touching your leg," he said. "You can keep your secrets and your book." He set his gloves under her thigh and found the hole. Through and through, high muscle missed the femur. Not fresh, not clean. "Name," he said. She swallowed. Mara Santos." "Eli," he said. "I have a roof and heat. If you fight me, you die here." He slid the Colt back into leather and gathered her with careful hands. She stiffened but did not resist. Her weight was smaller than the pain she carried. Her hair smelled like wet bark and smoke. He lifted her to Daisy and mounted behind his arms tight around her so she would not slide. The trees broke to a narrow trail. The ridge whistled. Daisy flattened her ears at the sound, and Eli felt her tremble through the saddle. The cabin showed dark under a stand of oaks, stovepipe, a black finger pointing at the sky. Inside the room was one box of heat and shadow. A cast-iron stove ticked and gave back orange along the walls. Shelves carried jars and old bottles. A narrow bed took the far corner. Eli kicked the door shut and shouldered it until the latch caught. He stripped his mitts, pulled water from the bucket, and set it on the stove. He worked without hurry and without talking because his hands always slowed when his mouth tried to lead. He cut away cloth stiff with ice and blood, then paused until he found a blanket to lay over her hips and stomach. The bullet's path was clean enough. What would kill her was cold and dirt. He poured whiskey over the wound. It steamed on her skin. She hissed and gripped the blanket hard. Her palm was warm against his wrist for a second, then it shook. "Breathe," he said. "You first?" She said, a ghost of humor that startled him. He threaded the needle and set the edge of his hand into her thigh to steady it. He had stitched men on floors and wagon beds with shells falling within earshot. He had told boys to look at his eyes and not at their insides. He did not talk now. He set the points and drew neat tracks across skin, and when the blood welled, he caught it with cloth and pressed, and when the muscle twitched, he slowed and waited. The stove breathed, he breathed, she breathed. When he finished, he crushed dried golden seal and yarrow with the pestle, mixed it with a splash of whiskey and a little boiled water, and packed the paste along the line of his work. The smell rose bitter and clean. He wrapped her thigh with clean strips and tied off. "Drink," he said, holding a tin cup to her mouth. The tea was willow bark and hot enough to steam her face. She drank and watched him over the rim. "Why help me?" she said. He shrugged, felt his shoulders answer in old ways that remembered discipline. "You were under a tree in a storm." Her gaze drifted to a satchel near the door. It was black leather too fine for the rest of her things. A strap had been cut and retied with rawhide. She looked at it the way a hand looks for a weapon in the dark. "You said not to touch your book," he said. "I will not." Her head dipped. The braid at her neck had come partly loose, and he saw a small feather caught in the weave, black with a purple sheen when the firelight caught it. Raven. It moved when she swallowed. "Red hollow mine," she said, as if the words had weight that needed sharing. "The men do not die from rock." He waited. She closed her eyes, and for a while there was only the stove and the winter knocking the wall with cold knuckles. When she slept, she spoke in Cherokee. He sat on the chair beside the stove with his rifle across his lap and listened to words he did not know wrap-around names he did. The hours took color. He fed the fire and watched frost creep backward along the panes. When she woke sweating, he cooled a cloth and laid it along her temple. He kept his hands working and his mouth quiet. Once the shape of an old tent with its ropes cut flickered across his sight, and he could smell lye and iron and hear a boy call for a mother who did not come. He shut the door on that and tightened the blanket at her shoulders. Toward morning, she woke without fever and found the ceiling with her eyes, then the shelves and the iron hook by the door where his coat hung. Her focus sharpened. "Your name," she said. "Eli Mercer." "Thank you, Eli Mercer," she said, her mouth softened. "You looked for my breath when mine forgot the way." He set water for coffee and hung her wet coat by the stove. "You lost blood," he said. "You do not get out of that bed." "I do not plan to run," she said. She watched him lift the satchel and set it closer to her. Her fingers slid over the leather and found the tied strap. She took a small book from inside, palm-sized, and held it like a warmed stone. He saw pages crowded with neat strokes and strange diagrams of lungs and plants, and he saw lines that were not letters at all, just points and bars and patterns that reminded him of music he had never heard. She caught his look and closed the book with a flat hand. "I told you not to touch it," she said. "I'm not touching it," he said. "I am looking at your hand." Her eyes stayed on him a second longer. Then she let out a breath. It came visible in the cold pocket between her lips and the coffee steam and wove into the air above the cup. She tried to sit. He put a palm to her shoulder, and she did not fight him. The flesh under his hand was hard with work and long roads. The feather moved again at her neck. "They will find me," she said. "He pays men to follow." "Who?" he said. Her mouth set. "Kincaid." He poured coffee into a tin cup and put it on the table by the bed. "Ashford Hollow is a half day in the other direction," he said. "He can pay who he likes there." Her eyes cut to the window. "He can pay who he likes anywhere," she said. Eli sat back down and took up the stone to sharpen his knife. The edge had dulled a notch. He watched it catch the light and give it back. The sound of steel on stone was a thin song. It calmed his elbows and told his fingers what to do when the next bad hour came. "Your father," he said. "He is Mateo." She looked at the feather once as if it could teach her throat how to carry a hard sound. "Yes." He let it rest there. The flames clicked inside the stove. Daisy stamped in the lean-to and shook the boards. The weather pushed at the eaves and moaned in the chinks. He could feel the ridge whistling through the mare's bones as if it had come inside with them. After a while, Eli checked her bandage again. The skin was warm but not angry. He placed 3 fingers along the inside of her wrist and felt the pulse. Her eyes were on his hand. She turned her palm and set her fingers over his. For a beat, his hand did not feel like a stranger's. The first hoofbeats came as a faint quiver in the floor before he heard them. Daisy lifted her head and blew. Eli went to the window. The distance was a wash wind moving the trees in one direction at once. The sound came again, a mix of hooves and harness. Mara pushed herself up on one elbow. Her voice found a quiet place and put the words there. "Silas Kincaid put a price on me." The hoofbeats faded to a smear in the wind. Eli set the rifle where he could reach it and checked the latch again. Mara watched his hands. Her mouth was a straight line. "You cannot fight a price," she said. "I'm not planning on a fight," he said, "not in a room this small." Her eyes slid to the satchel. She pulled a smaller fold of leather from the pocket and worked at a wax seal with her thumb. The seal broke clean. She held out the letter. "For Jonah Whitfield," she said. "He knew my father in Boston. Give him this, and only if his door is shut. You trust him." "I trust what my father wrote about him," she said. The corner of her mouth twitched. "And Jonah hates company men. That helps." Eli took the letter and slid it inside his coat. He moved a crate in front of the door and dragged the chair beside the bed so she could brace her back. He set the rifle where it would balance against the frame, with the barrel pointed at the floor. "Keep it close," he said. "You hear the latch rattle twice, it is me. Once means it is not." Her brow lifted. "Practical." "Breathe slow," he said. "Drink water even when you are not thirsty." She touched the feather at her neck. "Go." He stepped out into a cold that bit the lip and scraped the lungs. The world was a sheet of white that had been scuffed by wind. Daisy tossed her head and blew steam. He checked the cinch and spoke low into her ear. The mare flicked an ear and settled. The trail to Ashford Hollow kept to the edge of the ridge, then dropped into a long cut where the trees leaned toward each other. Smoke hung above the valley like a low roof. As he rode, the sounds changed. Wind ran down into tin. Voices became hard from being used too long in loud places. The main street of the town lifted into view, one line of buildings shouldering a street churned into rutted ice and black mud. Coal dust rode the air and left a taste on the tongue. Eli kept his hat low and his pace without hurry. He tied Daisy outside the apothecary and stood a second to watch the window glass. Colored bottles made the light look like water. The bell over the door spoke when he went in. Jonah Whitfield had a face like clean paper that had been folded and unfolded many times. His beard was trimmed square. His hands were precise on a drawer full of tiny labeled envelopes. He looked up over wire spectacles. "Morning," Jonah said. "You look like the Ridge, sir. Cold and sharp." Looking for pain powder, Eli set at the volume a stranger would use. He stepped closer while Jonah set a brown packet on the counter and a closed door. Jonah held his gaze for a beat, then turned the sign to closed and slid the bolt. He nodded toward the back. They stepped between shelves that smelled of camphor and spirits and something bitter and green. Eli took the letter and gave it to him. Jonah cracked it carefully, then read in a silence that grew heavy by degrees. His lip trembled once. He folded the paper along the crease and put it against his chest with both hands. "So he is gone," Jonah said. "I did not have the chance to tell him that I was sorry for leaving. He knew too much about the right thing and would not do the easy thing, and I was not brave enough to stand beside him." He stopped. His eyes sharpened. "Where is she?" "Safe," Eli said, "for now." Jonah moved like a man who had worked alone long enough to have a system. From a locked cabinet, he took a small blue bottle, then 2 wrapped packets, then a corked vial of a clear liquid that smelled like pine sap. He spoke as he laid them down. "The blue is laudanum, only if the pain grinds her thoughts until she cannot find them again. It slows the breath. It makes mistakes. Better you use willow and golden seal when you can. The brown is an antiseptic powder I have been perfecting from quinine and a few things I will not insult you by naming. Mix it with clean water and pack it along the stitch line." He reached under the counter and pulled a rolled sheet. He opened it to show a rough map with a pencil line that climbed away from town and into the hills. "Roads are watched," Jonah said quietly. "Raven Notch is a bad idea in winter, which is why it is a good idea if you can make it. There is a shelf in the rock that takes a cart path no one has used in years. Widow's Cut lies beyond that. One path, sheer walls. If you must fight, make men come at you single file." Eli watched the lines, then watched the reflections in the glass. 2 men had leaned against the post across the street and found a way to make leaning look like work. A 3rd man moved past them with the posture of someone used to stepping over people. A wool coat that fit 2 well boots without stains, a hat set just so. A scent of tobacco drifted through the cracked window frame, sweet and strong. Boone Talbot crossed in front of the apothecary and stood for a moment to light a match from the brick. The flame licked his cheek and made his eyes shine. When he shrugged his coat into place, something on a chain slid free for a second. A small oval of silver, a daguerreotype locket, a boy's face inside, pale, with lips that looked too blue. Jonah saw Eli see it. "He has a son," Jonah said in a voice that was more breath than sound. "Company doctor signed that boy's papers himself. Told him to go home and wait." "Who is the sheriff?" Eli said. "Amos Hart," Jonah said. A look crossed his face that tried to choose between anger and grief and settled on tired. His brother Levi died from the lungs last month. He blames himself for wearing a badge that did not weigh anything against money. Eli paid for the packets and the field kit of bandage cloth Jonah pressed into his hands. They stepped to the front. Jonah slid the sign back to open as if the act were ordinary. The bell spoke again. The men across the street were still leaning. Eli made a line to the general store and traded coin for coffee beans and a new kettle. He said as few words as possible and let his eyes behave like a man who was in town for work and hated town. When he came out, the sheriff was outside the saloon. Amos Hart wore the tired like a shirt. His star sat on his vest and caught the weak sun. Hart looked at Eli, then looked at the alley beside the saloon and walked into it. Eli set the kettle in the saddlebag and followed. The alley smelled like old beer and horse piss. Hart stood with one shoulder against a board wall. He did not touch his gun. He did not take off his hat. "You went to Whitfield," he said. "I bought powders," Eli said. Hart's mouth made a shape that wanted to be a smile and did not get there. "Mateo Santos was a better doctor than this town deserved. My brother could not catch a full breath for a year. The company called it weakness. Mateo called it poison. He kept Levi alive longer than anyone had a right to promise. I buried him and I watched Silas Kincaid pay for a band to play while he opened a new shaft." Hart took a folded paper from inside his vest. The paper had the look of something a man had carried against his heart too long. He offered it to Eli. "My sworn statement," Hart said. "Names, dates, bodies. Some folks think talking is brave. Talking is the least a man can do when his hands are empty. If you have someone who will print, give them this." His eyes flicked toward the street. "Boone Talbot is in town. He has men on every road out. The wire office has a clerk who drinks at the saloon for free. Do not trust the wire." Eli took the paper and did not put it away until he had memorized the first 2 names. He nodded once. Hart nodded back as if 2 men had agreed that their own skin was not the most important thing they owned. Back outside, the two watchers had turned into four. Boone was not in sight. Eli mounted without hurry. He touched Daisy with his heel and let her start slow, then quicker when the curve hid him from the line of the saloon. He left the main street by a cut behind the church and put brush between himself and the eyes that worked for money. He took a long arc through the timber where the snow was clean and deep. He stopped twice to let Daisy breathe and to listen for what followed. Once he saw a gray jay flash between trees and disappear into nothing as if the tree had eaten it. He felt the ridge wind again before he heard it. By the time the oaks that guarded the cabin rose out of the white, the light had gone thin. The stove had banked itself to a low glow behind the door. Eli slid from the saddle and listened hard. The world gave him his own breathing and Daisy's and the groan of the eaves. He worked the latch twice, then opened. The rifle was already in Mara's hands. She lowered it. Her face had color again. The bandage was clean. Steam made the window look soft. She had set a pot near the coals. The room smelled like coffee and boiled willow. "You stirred the hornet nest," she said. "They were already stirring," he said. He set the parcels out on the table and named each one with a few words. He held up the laudanum and she shook her head. He put it back in the satchel. He handed her Hart's statement and watched her eyes move across the page. She breathed in through her nose as if taking in a pain that did not belong to her body. "Levi Hart," she said. "I remember the face from the ledger." He took the tonic. It eased him some. Not enough. Jonah gave away through Raven Notch. Eli said, "If we have to move, that is one way." Mara's fingers found the feather and then the book. She opened to a page with a drawing of a lung split into lobes. She tapped a place with her nail and whispered in a language that sounded like river stones. Then she shut the book and put it back in the satchel as if she could hide its light. The sound came before they felt it. A line of hooves on hard ground, a jingle of harness, then the thrum of men who thought they owned the land under their feet. Mara reached for the field glass that sat under the window. She angled it between curtain and pane and held her breath until her chest refused to hold any more. "Road," she said. "4 riders, coming up from the cut by the creek. They are spreading to watch the hollow." Eli looked to the door and the latch. He put his hand on the knife and felt the edge he had made with Jonah's stone. He counted the breaths between hoofbeats and felt his lungs answer without his permission. He looked at Mara. She lifted the rifle and set the stock to her shoulder. The feather at her neck did not move. Her hands were steady. The coffee on the table sent up one thin ribbon of steam that folded into the air and vanished. The first riders came in on the creek side, careful and spread wide. Eli blew out the lamps and moved the chair from the door. Mara eased to a knee and tested her leg. The rifle sat easy in her hands. "They do not know the back trail," Eli said. "Not yet." She nodded once. Her face had gone still in a way that made it look older. He slung the satchel across his chest, slotted Jonah's packets deep, and shouldered his coat. He touched her pulse and felt it quick and tight and strong. "Hold your breath when the latch moves," he said. She gave him a look that said she already knew that. He worked the door and slid into cold that stung the eyes. Daisy shifted and blew frost. Eli led her around the far corner where the wind had scoured the snow to a crust. He went back in and lifted Mara with care. She set her jaw and did not make a sound. They moved under the oaks and took the deer track that kept to the shadow of the ridge. Behind them, the hoofbeats grew into a pattern of command, a man in front with a voice that carried 2 flanks that had learned how to count. Mara held the rifle across her lap. The feather at her neck lay flat. The climb pulled heat out of them. The ridge found every seam and poured wind through it. Daisy picked her way with a sense that came from years on ice. The sky held a pale coin of sun and nothing else. When they hit the switchback that cut toward the notch, the sound of the pursuit thinned, the trees tightened, the light went green. They reached a narrow shelf where rock showed through. Boot prints would last there. Eli took a pine bough and brushed their sign until the stone looked unused. He worked fast, then let the bough fall and took Mara's hand back to the saddle. They climbed again. Raven Notch rose from the spine of the mountain like wings. 2 pillars of stone leaned toward one another, and the wind sang between them. Daisy pinned her ears. Eli set a hand to her neck until the tremor eased. The snow was shallow on the stone, then deep off it. On the far side, the trail narrowed and became a ledge above a chute that fell away into white and rock. "Slow and look where you mean to go," he said. Mara put her good leg against the left stirrup and balanced her weight. The mare tested each step. Their breath made a long white rope in the air that unspooled and vanished. Halfway across, a shot snapped behind them and puffed snow from the ledge by Eli's boot. He felt the sting along his ankle where a stone chip found skin. He did not turn. He said nothing. The second shot went wide and sang off the pillar. Daisy bunched and tried to lift. Eli put his face against her neck and spoke until the quiver dulled. On the far lip of the notch, Eli swung down and looped the reins around a horn of rock. He slid the rifle out and passed it up to Mara, who had already sighted where the first flash had come. She squeezed once. A figure at the mouth of the notch staggered and went to one knee. Another shape tried to go around and found less stone than he expected. He pinned himself flat, then scuttled back. A third voice called from below and to the right. "Hold your fire, Amos Hart." Eli saw the hat brim first, then the star set low on a vest. Hart looked up and tucked himself into a pocket of rock. "I trailed them," Hart called. "I can buy you a minute or two." "Buy it," Eli said. Hart's shots came spaced and measured. Men moved less when he shot. Eli and Mara slid back to Daisy and pushed on along the ledge until the trail broadened into a shoulder of mountain. The wind dropped to something a man could stand up in. A narrow throat of rock opened ahead. Widow's cut, Mara said, her breath thin. "Crossfire if we can get height," Eli said. The cut was a split in the ridge, just wide enough for a horse to pass. On either side the walls lifted smooth and cold. Here and there, wind had left a shelf of snow stuck to the rock like icing. Eli led Daisy behind a jut of stone and looped the reins. He scanned for holds, found a seam, and climbed until he reached a ledge the size of a door. He hauled Mara up by her forearms, then set a stack of rocks where they could rest the rifle. Across the ravine, Hart found his own ladder and rose into a crack that put his shoulders behind stone. They waited. The cut held the sound of their breathing, and nothing else. Eli checked his Colt and counted lips moving. Mara pressed fingers to the base of her neck where the feather lay, then wrapped her hand back around the stock. The cold climbed from the rock through the cloth and into their bones. Eli felt his teeth want to meet. He did not let them. The first of Boone's men entered the cut on foot, bent low and slow. He studied the corners with the caution of a man who had buried friends. Another followed, then waved. Horses stepped in, heads up, eyes white. Boone came third, his coat gray and the shadow matchlit earlier light gone from his face. He looked small against the rock and very present. Hart's whistle cut the air. Mara's shot took the lead horse in the shoulder. The animal screamed and went down on its knees. The cut turned into noise. Bullets clipped rock and whined. Powder smoke hung without a place to go. Eli fired twice at muzzle flashes and ducked. Stone bit his ear. He tasted grit. A rider tried to scramble up the far wall and slid back boots, cutting lines in the frost. Hart shot him in the thigh, and he fell into the narrow with a cry that sounded like someone else's. Another man pushed for the left wall, found a path in broken ledges, and began to climb hard. Eli saw him and shifted, but the angle was wrong. Mara tracked him, waited for the head to show where there was nowhere to hide, and touched the trigger. The man dropped and thumped flat. The third minute felt like 10. Eli's hand found the knife at his belt, as if it needed to know it was there. A shot punched the rock by Mara's shoulder and sent a spray into her face. She blinked and kept sight. The next shot found her. It took her high and back. She jerked and the rifle slid. Eli caught it by the forestock and hauled her down behind the stack of stones. Blood ran under his palm and warmed his skin. "I am all right," she said. Her face had gone white, through and through. He looked and saw the exit tear at the back of her shoulder. He pushed a cloth into the hole and felt the warm pulse. He held pressure and breathed. Hart covered firing in a rhythm meant to sound like two men instead of one. Below them, Boone moved behind his fallen horse and a shoulder of stone. He leaned in, then leaned back. His hat had gone somewhere. His hair lay damp against his temple. He called the cut, making his voice seem close. "Eli Mercer," he said. "Sheriff, talk instead of bleed." Mara tried to lift. Eli kept his hand on the cloth and shook his head. He shifted enough to see down the cut. Boone had his revolver in his right hand and his left pressed to his thigh. The set of his mouth had lost its polish. For a second his coat swung open and the silver locket moved and caught what little light there was. The boy's blue lips shone in the tin image. "You killed Mateo Santos," Mara said. Her voice was clear. Boone's eyes moved to where her words had come from. "On orders," he said. He spoke as if the words cost him, but he could afford them. "I take mine from money. I took that one from Silas Kincaid. I am taking this one from blood. My boy cannot lie flat without drowning. I need what he had in that book." "Your men will not walk out," Hart called. "You know that much. You pinned yourself in. You did not plan for the climb." "I planned for men who shoot to kill and not to talk," Boone said. Eli let his breath out. He felt the fabric go slick under his hand. He took his fingers away for a second and the blood came slow. He pressed again. He looked across to Hart and lifted his chin. Hart did not move his rifle. "Set the gun down," Eli said. "Mara is bleeding. The faster we stop it, the less mistakes we make with the next thing." "I need this gun until I do not," Boone said. "We need you to say under oath what you are saying now," Hart said. "Names, places, wire orders, your own hand on it." Boone gave a short sound that might have been a laugh if it had more strength. "Sheriff, you already have my name. If I are dead, it is worth less than the dust under your feet." Mara shifted under Eli's hand and set her jaw. "Your son is called Evan," she said. She did not make it a question. Boone stared up at the ledge. The hand that held his gun changed in the way it held it. "Yes." Mara drew a breath and spoke quieter. "The book is not all you need. You need a hand that knows how to use it. Your company doctor never tried to learn." Boone swallowed. He looked at his leg and then up again. "If I come out and give you my gun, if I write a letter and send it on a fast horse, will you take the boy from his bed and keep him from dying when the music stops?" "Lower the gun," Eli said. His voice had no sharp in it. It felt like something made of wood that had been sanded with patience. Boone hesitated, then shifted his grip and put the revolver in the snow where both sides could see it. He pushed it away with 2 fingers. He sat back against the cold wall and closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the gloss had gone. He looked like a man who had stayed up too long holding a fever down for someone else. "I am bleeding," he said. "Left thigh. You will get better testimony if I do not pass out." Eli slid down the rock and moved toward him with his hands where Boone could see them. Hart tracked with his barrel without comment. Mara lifted her good arm and aimed again, the rifle steady despite the blood on her sleeve. Eli reached Boone and tore the cloth from his leg. The bullet had dug a channel and left a mess. He cleaned fast with the clear liquid Jonah had given him. The smell of pine cut through metal and smoke. Boone's jaw clenched and a low sound came out through his teeth. Eli packed the brown powder into the wound and wrapped strips tight. Boone took in air through his nose and let it out slow. He watched Eli work as if learning a language he had refused to speak. He reached inside his coat and took the locket in his hand, then let it fall back. "I have a pencil," he said. "You will write," Hart called. "I will send," Boone said. Eli pressed the last knot down and looked up the wall to where Mara waited. Her face had lost the shock's glassy stillness and found focus again. Her hand stayed firm on the stock. The feather had a line of dried blood along its edge. She spoke to Boone without moving the rifle. "Give me your leg again. I will stitch clean. Then you come with us." Boone shifted enough to give her his leg. Eli steadied her with one hand while she set the needle with the other. Her breath hitched and then found a steady count. The clear liquid bit the air with pine. Boone stared at a point on the rock and said nothing until the last knot lay flat. He pulled a small pencil from inside his coat and a scrap of paper folded into a square. He wrote slow and hard. The lines were blocky and careful, like a man laying planks for someone else to walk on. He signed his name and pressed the locket into the crease to make a hard seal with the chain. "Evan Talbot," he said. "Room above Sutter and Hess, Cincinnati. The boy reads the wire at noon each day." Hart climbed down boots ringing lightly against the stone. He checked the bodies without softness, took a revolver from a hand that had nothing to do with it anymore, and turned the dead man's face to the rock. He tucked Boone's letter into his vest. "We move," he said. "They will have more." They crossed back under the notch with Mara resting her hands on Eli's shoulders. Daisy picked a careful line along the ledge. Powder smoke thinned and slid away on the wind. The sun found no place to sit in the sky, and so it just hung and gave up very little. The woods opened to a narrow path used by carters years back, ruts still grooved into the earth under the snow. A half-mile down a creek, they found a cabin that looked like the bones of a hand. The door had sagged. The roof held the snow, but wanted to think about letting it go. Inside, a stove waited with its mouth open. Hart stamped the floor and checked the corners, then the rafters, then the stovepipe. He found a handful of wood under a bench and a coffee tin of nails. Eli set fire with dry shavings and breath. Heat moved into the old room in thin waves. Mara sat on a crate and held her own cup while Eli cut her shirt away from the shoulder. The blood had clotted to cloth in a dark patch. He poured more of Jonah's clear over the wound, and she stiffened. Her hand found the feather without looking. Boone sat with his back to the wall and watched like a student who had come late to a class and now knew he should not miss a word. The bottle of laudanum lay on the table where Eli had set it. Mara looked at it once, then pushed it away with 2 fingers. "My head needs to stay where it is," she said. Eli stitched clean and even. He packed the brown powder and tied off. He felt the tremble in his fingers after and hated it, then set his hands flat on his knees until the shake left. Hart cracked the door and slipped out. His boots faded into the snow, then came back fast. He leaned in and shut the door with his shoulder. "Telegraph," he said. His breath steamed the air white. Message sent from the saloon office. "Kincaid wants the iron bridge at mile marker 3 held and burned if needed. 2 men with fuses already there." Boone's face went closed in a way that looked like a wound healing crooked. He burns his own bridges when they do not suit him. "We cut him off at the bridge," Hart said. No one answered because there was nothing to argue. Eli checked the satchel. He took the map and folded it to a square that fit his palm. He slid the laudanum back into the bag for the weight without looking at it. He handed Boone a short-barrel Colt with the cylinder empty and showed him. "You carry this for the look of it," he said. "You do not load it unless I tell you." Boone accepted it without objection. Hart broke open a crate by the door and found old rope. He cut lengths that would do a job if there was a job. Mara stood and wavered once. Eli set a hand to her elbow until the floor returned. She breathed slow through her nose and let the air out in a thin line. They moved back into the cold. The track to the river kept to the lowest ground. Frost had needled the mud into spears an inch high. A red fox ghosted through the scrub and stopped to stare with one gold coin of an eye, then ran. Smoke from the town lay to their right, a gray roof over black chimneys. The iron bridge rose ahead, a long lattice of black against a paler sky. It hummed when the wind went through it. Below, the river had broken and refrozen and broke again near the pier's water, showing in slick tongues that slid and closed. 2 men stood on the near approach, with a coil of fuse, and a crate stamped with a chemical name in red ink. Another figure hunkered by the far pier, with a length of line that ran like a snake to the center span. Eli saw the way the men's shoulders were turned and knew they were expecting tired miners and not men who had climbed out of a fight. Hart went left under the bridge and into shadow. Boone drifted right limp stiff from being stitched tight. Eli took Mara with him up to the stay where they could see and be seen only late. The iron sang under the lightest foot. A jay called once harsh and quick, then went silent. Hart's first shot cut the fuse where the first man held it. The rope spit and died. The second man spun and reached for a match. Boone came out of the right side brush with his empty gun held like a real one, and the man flinched. Eli stood up into the sightline and fired once. The match flew and hissed in snow. On the far side, the figure by the pier struck a flint and brought flame to line. The fuse grabbed and ran with a quick, hungry sound. Eli saw the black thread race across iron like a snake that had been woken. He ran. His boots hit iron and echoed echo answered by echo in a long chain. The cold went through his soles and up his bones. He reached the center and dropped to his knees and slapped the line with his glove and missed. He grabbed again and felt the tar under his palm. "Knife," he said. Mara was already there, lighter, her breath thinner. She pulled the blade from her belt and slid it under the fuse and sawed. The line burned down to the steel and flared. Eli felt the heat on his face like opening an oven. The knife bit through. The line went dead, and he tore the dead length away and kicked it into the river. The man on the far pier looked up, saw that he was seen, and ran for the edge. His boot slipped on hoarfrost. His feet shot out, and he grabbed air, and then grabbed nothing. He slid and went over. He caught a beam with his fingers and hung. His mouth opened around a sound that came slow in the wind. Hart broke from shadow and ran along the lower support to where he could see the man hang. He stopped. The lines at the corners of his mouth deepened. He lifted his rifle an inch and then set it down. "Leave him," Hart said to no one and to everyone. The man's boots flailed. His hands began to open without wanting to. Mara looked at Eli. Her mouth said nothing. Her eyes did not move. Eli lay flat and pressed his chest to iron. He slid his arm through the lattice, grabbed the man's wrist, and missed the first time. He tried again and found bone. The skin under his hand was slick with frost and fear. The tendons jumped like wire. The man's other hand went slack and fell. All his weight poured into Eli's shoulder. Iron cut the skin at Eli's elbow. He pulled with his back and felt something old and wrong, and it picked that moment to speak. He pulled anyway. Hart moved in and got a hold of the man's coat and then the belt. Boone caught the back of Hart's vest and leaned away to take another pound. Mara pinned Eli's legs so he could lift. They got the man up and rolled him onto the grating. He choked and coughed, and a line of saliva hung between his lip and the iron and froze. His eyes rolled like a horse's. He saw Boone and tried to crawl away with his elbows. Hart set a hand on the back of his neck and held him still. "Look at me," Hart said. "You can walk out. You can tell someone you changed your mind. Or you can stay and keep making choices you cannot carry. Your legs will work until the cold decides to keep them." The man's eyes focused and then slid away. He said nothing. He was younger than Eli had thought from the way he moved. Boone looked across the river toward town, where steam rose from the engine shed and the tracks shone in two black lines. He said nothing either. He worked the locket in his hand until it made a dull sound against his ring. They pulled the crate of powder off the approach and into the brush. Hart doused the slow match with river slush. Eli set a wedge of ice on the burned spot on his arm until the sting went honest. Mara flexed her stitched shoulder and did not wince. The whistle came low and far, then grew. It cut across the river and made the iron sing a new note. A freight crawled out from behind the mill and took the curve with groaning wheels. The engineer leaned on the horn when he saw figures on the bridge. He pulled again, and the sound pushed wind off the water. The train slowed, and a brakeman waved with his cap and swore in a voice that sounded tired of the same problem. Hart climbed the side ladder at the rear of a flat car and hauled himself up. He reached for Mara, and she caught his wrist. Eli pushed her from below, then hooked a hand on the step and took his turn. Boone waited for the rescued saboteur to pull himself onto the gravel, then handed him the end of the rope from the crate and used it to lash the crate shut. He tossed the rope away and caught the ladder. The man he had been standing by watched him go with a face that did not yet know what to do with what it had seen. The cars slammed against each other in a slow wave of clanks. Eli crouched low between stacks of cut timber and pulled Mara into the hollow the wood made. The smell there was new and sharp, clean sap under the old coal stink. Hart planted himself at the corner with his rifle held low but ready. Boone sat with his back to the load and the locket pressed flat into his palm. The train crept past the bridge and the river fell behind and made less noise. Snow came down in sift, not flakes, the air too cold for shapes. Mara breathed against Eli's collar and her breath warmed the skin there. He could hear her heartbeat when he let his head rest against the wood. A boy in a cap too big for him ran along the platform at the next yard and shouted to the brakeman then, to anyone who would listen. His voice carried the way voices do when they believe their own message. "Wire from Charleston," the boy cried. "Silas Kincaid under indictment. Orders to hold all company freight. Readings posted at the office." The brakeman laughed once without humor and waved him off, then waved him back when he saw the seal at the top of the paper. A few men at the edge of the platform turned to look at the moving cars. Their faces were a mix of surprise and calculation, the way faces get when news changes the ground they thought they were standing on. In the shadow of the stacked boards, Mara closed her eyes for a count and opened them again. Eli watched the frost on the rim of the flat car begin to soften under the heat of the brake shoes. A jay flashed along the yard fence and vanished into the dark of a pine, leaving only the idea of a feather in the air. Cincinnati took them in with river fog and furnace smoke. The Herald office sat on a corner where wagons clattered past and newsboys turned ink to sound. Inside, the press beat a steady heart. Paper smelled hot metal oil. Clara Bellamy stood over a table with proofs scattered like cards. Hair pinned neat sleeves, rolled eyes quick. Eli set the satchel on the table. Mara eased into a chair and kept her hand near the strap. Hart found a place against the wall where he could see the door. Boone stayed just inside the threshold, hat in both hands, locket under one thumb. Clara took in the room with a glance that weighed and filed. She pulled a clean sheet forward and set a pencil above it. "I have names," she said. "Give me the rest." Mara opened the book. The little pages were crowded with compact lines, drawings of lungs and plants and patterns of dots and bars. She did not explain the code. Her fingers moved like someone counting in a different meter. She spoke proportions and timing and small corrections learned by touch. Clara wrote. She kept up because she had learned a long time ago that hands can know faster than words. A man in a soiled scarf coughed raw in the doorway and bent double with it. Coal dust lay in the creases of his skin like shadow. Clara pointed him to a bench without looking up. Eli took the jars Jonah had wrapped and set out the brown powder, the golden seal, a measure of willow, and a kettle of hot water fetched by a boy with ink on his cheek. Mara mixed in a shallow bowl until steam rose with a bitter sweetness. She lifted the bowl and the man leaned over it. His breath dragged in. He did it again. A little moisture gathered along his lashes and did not fall. He watched Mara as if a rope had been dropped down a shaft and he had found it with both hands. Clara snapped a note to a runner. The boy was out the door with it and back with a square-jawed doctor from a dispensary 2 streets away. The doctor adjusted his spectacles and watched without speaking. His eyes gave him away when he understood what he was seeing. In a side room, Clara handed Mara a basin and a quiet place to wash blood from her shoulder. Eli tied a fresh bandage while the doctor observed the stitch line with a professional's careful nod. Boone sat on the edge of a desk and finished his letter to Evan. He kept the stroke steady and set the locket in the fold for weight. Hart read his own affidavit again as if to make sure the name still held. The hearing took place in a paneled chamber that had never seen this many minors. Boots tracked grime across a floor that usually held polished shoes. A clerk shook ink into a pen and frowned when it sputtered. The federal man at the table stared straight ahead and wrote what he was told to write. Hart spoke first. He gave dates and bodies and coroner's lines that had never matched the truth. The room listened. The sound changed after the first 6 names. It was less like a crowd and more like a held breath. Boone stood when called. He did not touch the brim of his hat to anyone. He gave Kincaid's orders without embroidery. He told them who passed cash to the wire clerk and who sent men to burn the lists. He said Mateo Santos fell on his porch, and that is where he stayed because men who do some things do not do others. His voice thinned once and thickened with something else. He kept speaking. Clara signaled her photographer. The man uncovered the lens of his box and watched Mara as she set a measured spoon to a cup with steam rising. Evan came through the door, held up by his own effort. He was pale with a gray under it, and he had the same set to his mouth as his father when pulling a weight. He sat and coughed and then breathed in the curl of vapor above the cup. The plate took light and kept it. Across town, a typed sheet went up under a nail on a bulletin board outside the courthouse. Men took off their hats to read it. The company seal looked smaller on printed paper. The words said what the boy at the yard had shouted at the train: indictment, accounts frozen, shipments held. An officer of the court in a good coat posted another sheet that said where the lines would form for claims. No band played in any street. Weeks moved slow at first then, with a rhythm that felt like work. Notices came down and new ones went up. A clerk wrote and had to wet another pen. A foreman with ash on his cuffs stared at his boots, while a widow signed her name and pressed a hand flat on a table to keep it from shaking. In the dispensary, the doctor learned to count to the same measures Mara did. He watched for the wrong breathing and told men to sit when they tried to stand. The Herald kept its presses warm. Clara slept on a couch 2 nights in a row. Ink took the lines of Boone's testimony and Hart's names and ran them across town and over the river. A man on a corner read out loud for men who could not see the small print. The sound carried to the lamp posts and came back. In a small room near the river, a bell above a door chimed for the first time in a way that belonged to a place rather than a street. Eli had carried in a narrow bed and 2 shelves. Mara had set her father's book in a drawer and hung a single black feather from a nail near the window. Steam from a kettle left a soft sheen on the glass. The new sign in the window did not have any name larger than the others. A letter came with a California stamp and dust on the envelope. Eli slid it open with a thin blade. A daguerreotype slid into his hand, a boy with color in his mouth again and a sunlight stripe on his hair. Evan sat in a chair by a window with a line of hills behind him. Boone's words were few on the paper. "Thank you. I am keeping the rest to myself." Boone had signed it with a hand that had forgotten how to make flourish and did not miss it. Hart sent a badge cut from a new sheet with a note folded around it, working further north now. The badge sat on the counter for a day, and then Mara hung it beside the feather. On a morning when the river breathed fog and the ironworks threw sparks above their roof, Eli found an envelope under the door with the seal of the governor. He turned it in his hand and heard paper whisper. He let it sit on the table. He stood a long time looking at it without breaking the seal. Mara watched him from the doorway. She had been washing bottles, and her sleeves were damp to the elbow. Her hair had escaped its knot and brushed the back of her neck. She dried her fingers and came to stand beside him. He opened the envelope and read. The language was official and heavy. It carried a promise wrapped in lines about land and the use of it. He set the paper down and turned. His hands were clean, but for a faint stain of golden seal in the cuticles. He reached for her with both and waited. She did not make him wait long. Her palms met his. The line of her mouth found a softness he had not seen on her face since the ridge. "You brought me out of a tree in a storm," she said. "You brought me out of a winter I did not know I was living in," he said. She lifted onto her toes and kissed him once. The room felt warmer for it. Outside the window, 2 black birds landed on the sill and clicked their beaks on the wood as if to test it. River light moved on the ceiling and made slow shapes. A man coughed in the hall, and the bell chimed. Eli and Mara let go at the same moment. He crossed to the door and opened it. The cold in the hall met the heat from the kettle and turned to breath that looked white and then did not look like anything at all. The black feather by the window stirred once in the draft and then lay still. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.